We're reading Les Miserables. Look at this thing. Look at this thing. Just, I'm horrified. I'm very stressed out by how much effort it's going to take to read this. Got it from the library. The library due date, and whatnot, and has auto renew, which is nice. But it says you saved $25 by using the library today. So use your libraries, kids. I had a bookmark. I don't know where it is now. Actually, I do know where it is, but it's far away. So never mind. We're going to use this thing for the time being. And now that we're reading Les Miserables, here comes the captain, or I suppose as she'll be called today, Mon Capitaine, because, something French. Like, I know the musical. I saw the film musical. I saw bits and pieces of the one with Geoffrey Rush and Liam Neeson, I think. I'm intimidated. I've never actually cracked open the book before. I don't know what to expect. The internet says lots of talk about the sewer system. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and this is the new translation by Christine Doniger. So, boom. Here we go. Pages are thick here. There we go. Skipping all the preamble stuff. Contents, introduction, further reading, notes on the translation, Les Miserables, Part 1. Oh, wow, okay. Part 1, Fantine, Part 2, Cosette, Part 3, Marius. Part 4, the Rue Plumet, Idle, and the Rue Saint-Denis, Epic. Part 5, Jean Valjean. Interesting. I have no idea what to expect. Oh, there's a chronology. Oh, okay, that's of Victor Hugo himself. I usually skip introductions because it's just like, if you've read the book, the introduction makes sense. And I don't want to get into that. I want to read the book. Further reading. Here we go. All right. Note on the translation. Here we go. Oh boy, here we go. Les Miserables. Part 1. Fantine. Book 1. Oh, jeez. There are multiple books per part? Book 1. A Good Man. 1. Monsieur Myriel. Oh, there's so much French. I'm in trouble. Okay. I'm going to pet this cat that's hiding in my lap here. Okay, alright. Forgive my terrible French. Here we go. In 1815, Charles Francois Bienvenu Myriel, that's all one name, Charles Francois Bienvenu Myriel, was Bishop of Digne. He was an old man of about 75. He had been Bishop of Digne since 1806. If only for the sake of being accurate in every particular, although this circumstance in no way impinges on the basic substance of what we are about to relate, it may be worth mentioning here the rumors and gossip circulating about him at the time of his arrival in the diocese. True or false, what is said about men often figures as large in their lives, and above all in the fate that befalls them, as what they do. Monsieur Myriel was the son of a councillor in the Parliament at AIX? O? There we go, whatever. Judicial aristocracy. It was reported that his father, intending that his son should inherit his position, had married him off very young, aged 18 or 20, a fairly common practice among parliamentary families. This marriage, it was said, did not prevent Charles Myriel from being much talked about. He was good-looking, though... This cat's distracting me. He was good-looking, though rather short in stature, Elegant, charming, witty. His entire early life was devoted to fashionable society and amorous intrigue. The revolution came. Events moved fast. Decimated, driven out, hunted down, the parliamentary family scattered. During the very first days of the revolution, Monsieur Charles Myriel immigrated to Italy. There his wife died of a chest ailment that had long afflicted her. They had no children. What then happened to Monsieur Myriel? The collapse in France of the old world, the downfall of his own family, the tragic spectacles of '93, perhaps even more terrifying for the émigrés watching from afar with magnifying horror, did these give rise in him to thoughts of renunciation and solitude? Did these give rise in him... Was he, in the midst of one of those distractions and attachments that filled his existence, suddenly dealt one of those mysterious and terrible blows that by striking at the heart sometimes fell a man, who would be left unshaken by public catastrophes that strike at his way of life and his fortune? No one could have said. All anyone knew was that when he returned from Italy, he was a priest. In 1804, Monsieur Myriel was parish priest of Brignoy. Brignoy. He was already old and lived a very secluded life. Around the time of the coronation, some parish matter, no one quite knows what anymore, took him to Paris. Among other influential individuals that he applied to on behalf of his parishioners was Cardinal Fesch. The worthy priest happened to be waiting in the antechamber one day when the emperor had come to visit his uncle. As Napoleon was on his way out, realizing he was being observed with some curiosity by this elderly gentleman, His Majesty turned round and said abruptly, "What good fellow is this, staring at me?" "Sire," said Monsieur Myriel, "in this fellow you see goodness. In the man before me I see greatness. There's advantage to both of us." That same evening the Emperor inquired of the Cardinal the name of the priest, and some time afterwards Monsieur Myriel was very surprised to learn he had been appointed Bishop of Digne. Anyway, what truth was there in the stories told of Monsieur Myriel's early life? No one could tell. Few families had known the Myriel family before the Revolution. Monsieur Myriel had to undergo the fate of every newcomer to a small town where there are plenty of tongues given to wagging and very few minds given to reflection. He had to be subjected to it, although he was a bishop, and because he was a bishop. But the rumors his name was associated with were, after all, perhaps just that. Rumors. Idle gossip, talk, empty words. Not even words. Palabras, in the muscular language of the South. Be that as it may, after Monsieur Myriel had been living in Digne and serving as bishop for 9 years, all this tittle-tattle, these topics of conversation that give small towns and small-minded people something to talk about, had been thoroughly forgotten. No one would have dared mention them. No one would even have dared call them to mind. Monsieur Myriel had arrived in Digne accompanied by a spinster, Mademoiselle Baptistine, who was his sister and 10 years his junior. Baptiste. Their only domestic help was a woman of the same age as Mademoiselle Baptistine, called Madame Magloire, who, having been Monsieur le Cure's servant, now acquired the dual status of Mademoiselle's maid and Monseigneur's housekeeper. As a simple parish priest, Monsieur Myriel would have been addressed as Monsieur le Cure. As bishop, he is now Monseigneur. Mademoiselle Baptiste Dene was long, pale, slight, and meek. She was the perfect incarnation of the word respectable, for apparently a woman must be motherly to be venerable. She had never been pretty. Her whole life, which had been simply a succession of good deeds, had ultimately conferred on her a sort of paleness and brightness, and with advancing years she had gained what might be called the beauty of goodness. What had been thinness in her youth became transparency in her maturity, and this diaphanous quality revealed the angel. She was more of an essence than a virgin. Physically, she seemed to be made of shadow, with hardly enough of a body to have any sexual identity, a little substance containing a glimmer of light, her big eyes, always downcast, an excuse for a soul to remain on earth. Madame Magloire was a busy, fat, round, little white-haired old woman, always out of breath, firstly because of her busyness, and then because of her asthma. On his arrival, Monsieur Myriel was installed in the episcopal palace with the honors dictated by imperial decree, whereby a bishop ranks immediately below a brigadier. The mayor and the president of the local judiciary first called on him, and he in turn made his first call on the general and the police chief. His installation complete, the town waited to see what the bishop would do. Cool. Chapter 2. I think, when I do when I try to divide these up in the stream, before I would do chapters 1 through 3, 2 through 4, I'm just gonna say part 1, part 2, So we'll get up to I don't know, part 90 or whatever, how many nights it takes to do this, but it's just, this is book 1, part 1, chapter 1, that's so much to keep track of. Anyway, part 2, or chapter 2. Monsieur Myriel becomes Monseigneur Bienvenu. The episcopal palace of Digne was next door to the hospital. The palace was an immense and handsome residence, built of stone at the beginning of the last century by Monseigneur Henri Puget, doctor of theology at the faculty of Paris and abbot of Simore, who had been bishop of Digne in 1712. A veritable baronial hall, as was the palace. Everything about it was grand. The bishop's apartments, the drawing rooms, the bedchambers, the very spacious court of honor with covered walks and arcades in the old Florentine style, the gardens planted with magnificent trees. In the dining room, a long and splendid gallery on the ground floor looking out over the gardens, Monseigneur Henri Puget had, on the 29th of July, 1714, held a ceremonial banquet for Monseigneurs Charles Brulart de Genlis, Prince Archbishop of Embrun, Antoine de Mesrenet of the Capuchin Order, Bishop of Grasse, Philip de Vendôme, Grand Prior of France, Abbot of Saint-Honoré de Lerins, François de Baton de Crillon, Baron Bishop of Vence. Not Venice, just Vence. So much French. Oh, geez. Is it Caesar or Cesare? Cesare would be Italian, so we'll say César de Sabron de Faucalaquer, Signor Bishop of Glandeve, and Jean Soanan, Oratorian priest, chaplain in ordinary to the king, Signor Bishop of Senez. Oh my God, please forgive my French. The portraits of these 7 reverend figures adorned this room, and that memorable date, the 29th of July, 1714, was engraved in letters of gold on a white marble table. The hospital was a single-story, low, narrow building with a small garden. 3 days after his arrival, the bishop visited the hospital. At the end of his visit, he left an invitation for the director to call on him. Monsieur le directeur de l'hôpital, how many patients you have at present? He said. 26, monsieur. Monseigneur. That was the number I counted, said the bishop. The beds are very close to each other, the director added. That's what I observed. The wards are no bigger than small bedrooms, and it's hard to keep them aired. That's what I would think. And then, when there is a ray of sunshine, the garden's very small for those convalescing. That's what I said to myself. In the event of an epidemic, we've had typhus this year, we had military fever 2 years ago, 100 patients sometimes. We just don't know what to do. That was the thought that occurred to me. There's no point in complaining, Monseigneur, said the director. We must accept things as they are. This conversation took place in the gallery dining room on the ground floor. The bishop remained silent for a moment, then suddenly turned to the director of the hospital. Monsieur, he said, how many beds do you think would fit into this room alone? Monseigneur's dining room, exclaimed the director in amazement. The bishop glanced around the room and appeared to be estimating measurements and making calculations. 20 beds easily, he said as though talking to himself. I can try that again. 20 beds easily, he said as though talking to himself. Then raising his voice, Now I tell you what, Monsieur le Directeur del Hôpital, there we go. Obviously something's wrong here. You have 26 people in 5 or 6 small rooms. There are 3 of us here, and we have room for 60. Something's wrong, I tell you. You're in my house, and I'm in yours. You give me back my house, this is where you belong. The following day, the 26 paupers were moved into the bishop's palace, and the bishop was installed in the hospital. Monsieur Myriel was not a man of means, his family having been ruined by the revolution. His sister had a life annuity of 500 francs, which was enough to meet her personal expenses at the presbytery. As bishop, Monsieur Myriel received from the state a salary of 15,000 francs. On the very day he took up residence in the hospital building, he determined once and for all the way in which his sum was to be used. We transcribe here a note made in his own hand. Note to regulate my household expenditure. For the seminary school, 1,500 francs. Congregation of the Mission, 100 francs. For the Lazarists of Montdidier, 100 francs. Seminary of Foreign Missions of Paris, 200 francs. Congregation of the Holy Spirit, 150 francs. Religious Foundations in the Holy Land, 100 francs. Societies for Maternal Charity, 300 francs. An extra payment for that of Arles, 50 francs. In aid of the improvement of prisoners, 400 francs. In aid of the comfort and release of prisoners, 500 francs. To obtain the release of family men imprisoned for debt, 1,000 francs. To supplement the salary of diocesan teachers in need, 2,000 francs. Public granary of the Haute Alps, 100 francs. Congregation of the Ladies of Digne, Manosque, and Sisteron for the free education of girls in need, 1,500 francs. For the poor, 6,000 francs. My personal expenses, 1,000 francs. Total, 15,000 francs. Throughout the entire time that he occupied the See of Digne, Monsieur Myriel made no alteration to this arrangement. As we have seen, he referred to it as regulating his household expenditure. The arrangement was accepted with total acquiescence by Mademoiselle Baptiste Tenay. For this saintly spinster, the Monseigneur of Digne was both brother and bishop, naturally dear to her and ecclesiastically her superior. She quite simply loved and venerated him. When he spoke, she deferred. When he acted, she approved. Their only servant, Madame Magloire, grumbled a little. The bishop had set aside for himself, it may have been noticed, only 1,000 francs, which, added to Mademoiselle Baptiste's income, amounted to a total of 1,500 francs a year. Both old women and the old man lived on these 1,500 francs. And thanks to Madame Magloire's unfailing thrift and Mademoiselle Baptiste's clever management, whenever a village priest came to Diné, the bishop still found the means to entertain him. One day after he had been in Diné, some 3 months, the bishop said, "And with all that, I still haven't enough." "I dare say you haven't," exclaimed Madame Magloire. "Monsignor hasn't even claimed the allowance the département owes him for the expense of a carriage in town and of visiting the diocese. That's what bishops used to do in the past." There's like little footnotes. The division of post-revolutionary France into newly created administrative areas called départements came into effect in 1790. Interesting. "Well, I declare," said the bishop, "you're quite right, Madame Magloire." And he submitted his claim. Sometime afterwards, the General Council, taking his request into consideration, voted him an annual sum of 3,000 francs that was registered as allowance awarded to the bishop for carriage expenses, mail coach expenses, and the expense of pastoral visits. This provoked a great outcry among the local bourgeoisie, and at the time a senator of the Empire, former member of the Council of 500, who had supported the 18th Brumaire and been given a magnificent senatorial estate near the town of Diné, privately wrote to Monsieur Bigot de Préameneu, the Minister of Public Worship, an angry note on the subject, from which we quote the following lines verbatim. "Carriage expenses! What for in a town of fewer than 4,000 inhabitants? The expense of pastoral visits? What good are these visits in the first place, and how can a mail coach get about in these mountainous parts? There are no roads. You can only travel on horseback. Even the bridge over the Durance Chateau Arnaud can barely support ox carts. These priests are all the same, greedy and miserly. This one pretended to be the good apostle when he first came here. Now he behaves just like the rest. He has to have a carriage and travel by post-chaise. He has to have luxury like the bishops of old. Oh, this priestly rabble. Things will be put right, Your Excellency, only when the Emperor has delivered us from the clergy. Down with the Pope!" Relations with Rome were not good. "For my part, I am all for Caesar," etc., etc. Madame Magloire, on the other hand, was delighted. "Well," said she to Mademoiselle Baptiste, "Monsignor puts everything else first, but he had to come round to himself eventually. He's taken care of all his charities. These 3,000 francs are for us at last." That same evening, the bishop wrote out and handed to his sister a memorandum worded as follows. Carriage allowance and allowance for pastoral visits. To provide meat broth for the hospital patients, 1,500 francs. For the Society for Maternal Charity of O, 250 francs. For the Society of Maternal Charity of Draguignan, 250 francs. For the benefit of foundlings, 500 francs. This is the way. For the benefit of orphans, 500 francs. Total, 3,000 francs. Such was Monsieur Myriel's budget. As for episcopal emoluments, fees for marriage bans, dispensations, private baptisms, sermons, benedictions of churches and chapels, marriages, etc., the bishop was all the more assiduous in extracting them from the wealthy because he gave them to the poor. Pardon me. After a while, offerings of money poured in. The haves and the have-nots came knocking at Monsieur Meriot's door, the latter in search of the alms brought to him by the former. In less than a year, the bishop had become the treasurer for all charitable donations and the dispenser of funds for all cases of financial distress. Considerable sums of money passed through his hands, but nothing could induce him to make any change in his lifestyle or to add the least extra to his barest needs. Far from it, as there is always more poverty below than fellow feeling above, everything was given away, so to speak, in advance of receipt. It was like water on dry ground. No matter how much money he received, he never had any. So he would stint himself. It being the custom for bishops to state their baptismal names at the head of their episcopal decrees and pastoral letters, the local poor, with a kind of affectionate instinct, had selected from the bishop's various names and first names the one that held some meaning for them, and they never called him anything but Monseigneur Bienvenu. Bienvenu means welcome. We will follow their example, and thus refer to him where appropriate. Besides, this designation pleased him. I like the name, he said. Bienvenu compensates for Monseigneur. We would not say that the portrait we have presented here is one that seems very likely. All we say is that it is very like. This is fun. As a quick aside, before we go on to Chapter 3, hey, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/hotdadreads. It's great. It's fun. We've already finished Pride and Prejudice. We've already finished War of the Worlds. Those are going to... Well, Pride and Prejudice already is, and War of the Worlds at the end of the week is going to be locked behind the paywall. So if you want to get access to those two, basically as audiobooks, if you will, complete streams of the entire book, along with everything in the super secret Saturday Shakespeare stream, which includes all of Much Ado About Nothing and the first 3 acts of Julius Caesar, head on over to patreon.com/hotdadreads. There's a level just for the super secret Saturday Shakespeare streams where I get to read some Shakespeare. We've got a level just for like some silly fun dad videos where like I do the dishes or shine my shoes. That's when I still got to record. I keep putting it off. You got a level that includes all of those, of course, and gets you access to all the prior books that we've already read. And then the top level is one where if you write something, I'll read it. So if you have a book, a novel, an autobiography, a play, a song, a one-act, a series of poems, a manifesto, basically as long as it's appropriate for the stream and it's, not evil towards mankind in some fashion, I'll read it. It'll be fun. Get your work in front of an audience and have it read by a hot dad. How do you know I'm a hot dad? Well, I have a pocket swatch. That's how you know. So yes, one more time, patreon.com/hotdadreads. And you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at hotdadreads. However useful those are going to be, we're going to try to get some other sort of social media going at some point. We're on YouTube, youtube.com/@hotdadreads. I think that'll take you there. Of course, twitch.tv/hotdadreads. And yeah. And if you want to really help me out, go to the twitch.tv/hotdadreads, click the little heart in the corner, and follow the stream. It'll also ask if you want to be notified. That's totally up to you whether you want to be notified when we have streams or not. But if we can get over 50 followers, we're able to make our next step forward and hopefully start to monetize this stream. I'm never trying to take money from you guys unless you're trying to give it to me, and that's for the Patreon. As far as monetizing the stream, I'm trying to take money from Jeff Bezos and Amazon, so we just got to get over 50 followers. Always free to follow. Subscribing will take money, and that's not even a possibility now. So yes. Thanks. You guys are cool. Chapter 3. For a good bishop, a demanding bishopric. This book is so heavy. Now I have a cat on my arm, so I'm holding a cat and a book. I gotta rest it on my leg. You know what we'll do? If we get enough followers that I can start to accept donations, like what are they, bits or something? Which are essentially pennies, I think, or like 10 of them is a penny. I don't remember what the number is. What we'll do is every time I get a bit, I'll have to pet the cat, if he's present. So that'll be like a stream to... he's pressing buttons on my stream. It'll be fun. When he's present, it'll be like, hey guys, donate now and I'll pet the cat. Anyway, chapter 3. Now I have a wedgie. Even though he had converted his carriage into alms, the bishop made his pastoral visits nonetheless. The diocese of Digne is a punishing one. There are very few plains, a great many mountains, hardly any roads, as we saw earlier, 32 parishes, 41 vicariates, and 285 chapels of ease. To visit all these is quite a task. The bishop managed it. He went on foot to places nearby, traveled by cart on the plain, and on a donkey in the mountains. The 2 elderly women accompanied him. When the trip was too much for them, he went alone. One day he arrived in Senez, an ancient episcopal town, riding an ass. His resources, which were very depleted at that time, did not allow him any better turnout. The mayor came to welcome him at the gates of the town and watched, scandalized, as he dismounted from his ass. Some of the townsfolk around him were laughing. "Monsieur le Maire," said the bishop, "and honorable citizens, I see I shock you. You think it very arrogant of a poor priest to ride on a mount which was that of Jesus Christ. I have done so out of necessity, I assure you, and not vanity." On his visits he was kind and indulgent, and did not so much preach as chat. He placed no virtue beyond reach. He never went looking very far for his arguments and his exemplars. To the inhabitants of one village he would cite the example of the neighboring one. In districts where they treated the destitute harshly, he would say, "Look at the people of Briançon. They've granted to the poor, to widows and orphans, the right to mow their meadows 3 days before everyone else. When their houses are falling down, they rebuild them at no cost. Consequently, it's a place blessed by God. There's not been a single person guilty of murder for a whole century." To the villages bent on gain and on bringing in the harvest, he said, "Look at the people of Embrun. If at harvest time the father of a family has his sons serving in the army and his daughters in service in town, and he happens to be ill and unable to work, the parish priest asks the congregation to pray for him. And after Mass on Sunday, all the people in the village, men, women, and children, go to the poor man's field and do his harvesting for him, and bring back the straw and the grain to his granary." To families divided by questions of money and inheritance, he said, "Look at the mountain folk of Devoleux. Devoleux? Oh, man. At Devoleux, a landscape so wild that not once in 50 years has the nightingale been heard. Well, when the father of a family dies, the boys go off to seek their fortunes, leaving the property to the girls that they may find husbands." To those areas that were inclined to go to law, and where the farmers ruined themselves paying duty on legal documents, he said, "Look at the good country folk of the Queyras Valley. They number 3,000 souls. My God, it's like a little republic. Both judge and bailiff are unknown there. The mayor does everything. He shares out the tax levy, taxes each person fairly, settles disputes free of charge, divides estates without remuneration, gives judgments at no cost, and he's obeyed because he's a good man among simple folk. To villages where he found no schoolmaster, again he cited the people of Queyras. Do you know what they do? He said. Since a little village of a dozen or so dwellings can't always support a teacher, they have schoolmasters paid by the whole valley who make the round of the villages, spending a week in this one, 10 days in that, giving instruction. These teachers go to the country markets where I've seen them. You can tell them by the quill pens they wear in their hatbands. Those who teach just reading have 1 quill, those who teach reading and arithmetic have 2, and those who teach reading, arithmetic, and Latin have 3 quills. But what a shame to be uneducated. Do what the people of Queyras do. This is the way he talked, seriously and like a father, inventing parables in the absence of examples, going directly to the point with few fine words and many illustrations, which was Jesus Christ's eloquence exactly, assured and persuasive. Chapter 4, Deeds to Match Words. His conversation was affable and cheerful. He was sociable with the 2 old women who spent their lives with him. When he laughed, it was the laugh of a schoolboy. Madame Magloire liked to call him Your Highness. One day he rose from his armchair and went to his bookcase to fetch a book. This book was on one of the top shelves. As the bishop was rather small in stature, he could not reach it. Madame Magloire, he said, bring me a chair. My Highness falls short of that shelf. It's the sound of my cat using a scratching post. Captain's here. Ophelia's over there. She's I guess she's excited by all the Les Miserables. One of his distant relatives, Madame la Comtesse de Lo, rarely let pass an opportunity when he was present to run through the list of what she called the expectations of her 3 sons. My book comfortable here. She had several very elderly relatives close to death, and her sons were their natural heirs. The youngest of the 3 was to come into a good 100,000 francs a year from his great aunt. The second was to inherit the title of duke from his uncle. The eldest was to succeed to his grandfather's peerage. The bishop usually listened in silence to this harmless and forgivable maternal swanking. I've never seen the word swanking before, let alone in a book of the caliber of Les Miserables. This is fantastic. On one occasion, however, he appeared to be more thoughtful than usual, as Madame de Lo rehearsed once again the details of all these inheritances and all these expectations. She broke off, saying impatiently, "For heaven's sake, cousin, what is it you're thinking about?" "I'm thinking," replied the bishop, "of something curious to be found, I believe, in St. Augustine. Place your hope in him who has no successor." On another occasion, when he received a letter announcing the death of a local dignitary that included a full-page list of not only the dead man's credentials, but also the feudal and noble qualifications of all his relatives, he exclaimed, "What a broad back death has! What a remarkable load of titles is blithely heaped on it, and what a sense of humor men must have to use the grave like this to flatter themselves." I trimmed my beard just before the stream. I'm a little bit itchy. He was sometimes capable of gentle mockery that almost always had a serious significance. Once, during Lent, a young vicar came to Digne and preached in the cathedral. He was quite eloquent. The subject of his sermon was charity. He urged the rich to give to the poor so as to avoid going to hell, which he depicted in the most dreadful terms he could, and to get to paradise, which he represented as desirable and delightful. Foot is distracting me. Among his audience was a somewhat tight-fisted, retired, wealthy merchant named Monsieur Geberond, who had amassed $500,000 in the manufacture of coarse cloth, serge, caddis, and felt caps. Monsieur Geberond had never in his life been charitable to any poor unfortunate. After that sermon, it was noticed he gave 1 sou every Sunday to the old beggar woman at the cathedral door. They had to share it between 6 of them. Oh, the old beggar women at the cathedral door. One day the bishop saw him making his donation and said to his sister with a smile, "There's Monsieur Geberond buying 1 sou's worth of paradise." I realize Twitch is... it's kind of the place for it, but maybe I should start an OnlyFans where I just read these books, but, I show off my foot. I'll take the shoe, the slipper, and the sock off, and, OnlyFans this stuff of, it's Les Miserables with toes. I don't know. I have inhaled some cat. Here we go. When charity was at stake, he was not to be discouraged even by a refusal, and on such occasions he found words that gave pause for thought. Once he was collecting for the poor in one of the town salons. The Marquis de Champtercier was there. A rich and mean old man, he contrived to be both ultra-royalist and ultra-Voltairian. Such a type did exist. When the bishop came to him, touching his arm, he said, "Monsieur le Marquis, you must give me something." The Marquis turned round and responded dryly, "Monseigneur, I have my own poor." "Give them to me," replied the bishop. One day he preached the following sermon in the cathedral. "Beloved brethren, my good friends, there are 1,320,000 peasant dwellings in France that have only 3 openings, 1,817,000 that have but 2. The door and 1 window, and finally 346,000 hovels that have just the one, the door. And this is because of something called the door and window tax. Put poor families, old women, and young children in those buildings, and see the fevers and illnesses you get. Alas, while God gives men fresh air, the law sells it to them. I'm not accusing the law, but I thank God. In Isère, in the Var, in the 2 Alps, Hautes and Basses, the peasants don't even have wheelbarrows. The men carry the manure on their backs. They have no candles. They burn resinous sticks and bits of rope dipped in pitch. That's the state of affairs throughout the Dauphin Highlands. They make bread for 6 months at a time. They bake it with dried cow dung. In the winter, they break this bread with an axe and soak it for 24 hours in order to be able to eat it. My brethren, have pity. See the suffering around you." Born a provincial? Born a Provençal, he had readily familiarized himself with all the southern dialects. Oh, dear Lord, it's just French now. He would say, "Now then, monsieur, are you being sensible?" as in the lower Languedoc. "Where have you been?" as in the lower Alps. "I've come with a good sheep and a good creamy cheese." "Prête un bon moto embe un bon fromage grasse," as in the upper Dauphin. This pleased people, and had contributed in no small way to his gaining acceptance by all. Both in a thatched cottage and up in the mountains, he was perfectly at home. He could say the most noble things in the most unrefined language. Speaking everyone's language, he found his way into everyone's soul. Furthermore, he was the same with everybody, whatever their social status. He would not condemn anything without due consideration or without taking circumstances into account. He would say, "Let's see how the wrongdoing was arrived at." Being, as he described himself with a smile, an ex-sinner, there was nothing off-puttingly doctrinaire about him. And he professed quite openly, and without the frown of the ferociously virtuous, beliefs that may be summed up thus: man exists in the flesh, which is at once his burden and his temptation. He drags it around him and gives into it. He drags it around with him and gives into it. He must be vigilant, keep it in check, repress it, and yield to it only in the last extremity. Yielding to it may still be wrong, but in that case the wrongdoing is venial. In so falling, he falls on his knees, and it may end in prayer. To be a saint is the exception. To be a good man is the rule. Err, weaken, and sin, but be among the good. To sin as little as possible, that is the law of mankind. Not to sin at all is the angel's dream. Everything earthly is subject to sin. Sin is a gravitational force. When he saw everyone condemning very loudly and being very quick to express indignation, "Oh my," he would say with a smile, "this looks like being a great crime that everyone commits. Here we have hypocrisies in fright, hurrying to protest and to take cover." He was forbearing towards women and the poor, on whom the burden of human society falls. He said, "The failings of women, children, and servants, of the feeble, the destitute, and the ignorant, are the fault of their husbands, fathers, and masters, of the strong, the rich, and the learned." He also said, "Teach those who are ignorant as much as you can. Society is to blame for not giving free education. It's responsible for the darkness it produces. In any benighted soul, that's where sin will be committed. It's not he who commits the sin that's to blame, but he who causes the darkness to prevail." As we can see, he had his own peculiar way of judging things. I suspect he had taken it from the Gospels. One day he heard in a salon the story of a criminal case that was going to come to trial. Some poor wretch in desperate straits, out of love for a woman and the child she had borne him, had coined counterfeit money. At that time, counterfeiting was still punishable by death. The woman had been caught passing off the first fake coin made by the man. She was detained, but there was evidence only against her. She alone could incriminate her lover and ruin him by confessing. She denied the accusation. She was pressed. She persisted in her denial. At this point, the Crown prosecutor had an idea. He alleged an infidelity on the part of the lover, and by means of cunningly presented fragments of letters succeeded in persuading the poor woman she had a rival, and that this man was deceiving her. Provoked by jealousy, she denounced her lover, confessed all, proved all. It was the man's undoing. He was shortly to be tried at O with his accomplice. It was this that was being talked of, and everyone was marveling at the magistrate's ingenuity. By bringing jealousy into play, he had used anger to elicit the truth. He had brought about the justice of revenge. The bishop listened to all of this in silence. When the discussion came to a close, he asked, Where are this man and woman to face judgment? At the court of assizes. He went on, and where will the crown prosecutor face judgment? A tragic incident occurred at Digne. A man was condemned to death for murder. Not really educated, but not completely uneducated, this poor wretch had been a fairground entertainer and a public letter writer. The trial was the talk of the town. On the eve of the day set for the condemned man's execution, the prison chaplain fell ill. The priest was needed to attend the criminal in his final moments. They sent for the parish priest. Apparently, he refused to come, saying, "It's nothing to do with me. I can't take on the responsibility of dealing with that charlatan. I am too unwell. In any case, it's not my job." This response was reported to the bishop, who said, "Monsieur le Curé is right. It's not his job. It's mine." He went straight to the prison and down into the charlatan's cell, called him by name, took him by the hand, and spoke to him. He spent the whole day and the whole night with him, forgetting about food and sleep, praying to God for the condemned man's soul, and asking the man to pray for his. He told him the best truths, which are the simplest ones. He was father, brother, friend to him, bishop only in blessing him. He taught him everything. He taught him everything, sustaining and comforting him. This man was about to die in despair. Death was an abyss to him. As he stood, trembling on that macabre threshold, he recoiled in horror. He was not ignorant enough to be totally unaffected. Deeply traumatic, his condemnation had, as it were, rent here and there the screen dividing us from the mystery of things and what we call life. He kept looking beyond this world through these fateful chinks and saw only darkness. The bishop enabled him to see light. You know, we had the window open, and I didn't realize that we turned on the air conditioning until I heard it turn off, and now I'm really mad that we had the air running the whole time because it's terrible for the sound, so I apologize for that. When they came to fetch the poor man the following day, the bishop was there. He went with him. He appeared before the crowd in his purple mozzetta, with his episcopal cross round his neck, alongside that trussed-up criminal. He climbed into the tumbril with him. He climbed onto the scaffold with him. So crushed and despondent the previous day, the man facing death was radiant. He felt his soul had been reconciled and his trust was in God. The bishop embraced him, and as the blade was about to drop, said to him, "He whom man slays, God restores to life. He who is cast out by his brothers returns to the Father. Pray, believe, enter into life. The Father is there." When he came down from the scaffold, there was something in his expression that made the crowd draw aside. It could not be said which gave greater cause for wonder, his pallor or his serenity. Coming home to the humble dwelling he would refer to with a smile as his palace, he said to his sister, "I have just been officiating as bishop." As the most sublime things are often those least understood, there were people in town who, commenting on the bishop's conduct, said, "It's affectation." Actually, it was only in the salons this was said. The ordinary people, who see no harm in saintly deeds, were touched and felt admiration. As for the bishop, it was a shock to him to have seen the guillotine, and it took him a long time to get over it. There is something nightmarish about the scaffold when it is standing there, ready. It is possible to feel a certain indifference about the death penalty, not to declare yourself, to say yes and no, so long as you have not seen a guillotine with your own eyes. But if you do come across one, it has a violent impact. You are forced to make a decision, to take sides for or against. Some, like de Maistre, admire it. For others, like Beccaria, it is abhorrent. The guillotine is the law made concrete. Its name is retribution. It is not neutral and does not allow you to remain neutral. Whoever sees it shudders with the most mysterious of shudders. All social problems raise question marks around this blade. The scaffold is not a structure. The scaffold is not a machine. The scaffold is not an inert contraption made of wood, iron, and rope. It is as though it were some kind of being with its own sinister initiative. To all appearances, this wooden construction can see, this machine can hear, this contraption can understand, this wood, this iron, and this rope have a will of their own. Its presence casts the soul into a ghastly trance in which the scaffold appears terrifying and involved in what it is doing. The scaffold is the executioner's accomplice. It devours. It eats flesh. It drinks blood. The scaffold is a kind of monster put together by the judge and the carpenter, a specter that seems to live by some dreadful life force created out of all the death it has inflicted. So it left a deep and horrible impression. The day after the execution, and for many days afterwards, the bishop seemed devastated. Gone was that almost fierce serenity he had had at that fateful moment. The phantom of social justice haunted him. He who generally returned from everything he did with such radiant satisfaction seemed to reproach himself. At times he talked to himself and muttered lugubrious monologues under his breath. Lugubrious monologues. This is one which his sister overheard one evening and recorded. I didn't realize it was so monstrous. It's wrong to be so deeply absorbed in divine law that you become unaware of human law. Death depends on God alone. By what right do men meddle with these matters of destiny? With the passage of time, these impressions diminished and probably faded away. Nevertheless, it was observed that from then on, the bishop avoided crossing the square on which executions took place. Monsieur Myriel could be summoned at any hour to the bedside of the sick and the dying. He was not unaware that this was his most important duty and his most important work. Widowed and orphaned families had no need to ask. He came of his own accord. He had the understanding to sit quietly with the man who had lost his wife he loved, with the mother who had lost her child. Just as he knew when to remain silent, so also he knew when to speak. O wonderful comforter! He did not try to blot out sorrow through oblivion, but to magnify and dignify it through hope. He said, "Mind which way you look at the dead. Don't think of what perishes. Look hard. You'll see the living light of your dear departed up there in heaven." He knew that faith is healing. He sought to counsel and calm the disconsolate by pointing to the resigned, and to transform the grief that dwells on the grave by teaching the grief that dwells on a star. That's beautiful. That made me really happy. It is in fact 11 o'clock, so we're going to call it, but For me, the quote, "The failings of women, children, and servants, of the feeble, the destitute, and the ignorant, are the fault of their husbands, fathers, and masters, of the strong, the rich, and the learned." That is poignant. My leg is asleep, so we're going to sit here for a moment. Yeah. I didn't drink a lot of water, which is probably why my voice is dry. And also the cat has been exuding hair, so I definitely swallowed some of that. That's never fun. But I love you. You're a good kitty. And you're a good kitty, even though you're not on camera. There we go. Okay. It's the stage between pins and needles, where my leg is like, oh, I can feel my leg again. Oop. Oh, nope. There's the pins and needles. Okay, so we're not going to move. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to sit here and enjoy this hot dad having his leg fill with blood. Ooh. What is that? The sensation of capillaries, I think? I don't know. Ooh, I can feel it on my butt. A friend of mine in doing Romeo and Juliet was playing Paris. He dies, and then he was just lying there waiting for the play to end when he finally got to get up and take his bows. And I don't know if it was every night, but certainly one of the nights, his whole leg was asleep. So he was like limping and grimacing, doing his bow, and then just running off stage as soon as he could. Pardon me. It is a fate I have always tried to avoid. Because I've died on stage many times. It's fun. But if you subscribe and join us for the super secret Saturday Shakespeare stream, we're reading Julius Caesar right now, and I played Cassius in that, and I died, so I got stories. But I died as Hamlet, I died as Mercutio. I got injured but didn't die as Michael Cassio in Othello. Or when you're pretentious and have seen the opera Otello, and I'm definitely pretentious. But hey, that's the end of our stream. Thank you so much for joining. Remember, we're trying to get likes and follows and things, so perfectly free to do it. Just head on to the corner and click the little heart at twitch.tv/HotDadReads. And if you want to follow on Twitter, on Twitter, sure, do that. But if you want to follow on YouTube, go ahead. We need like 1,000 subscribers before any of that can be monetized, so that's going to be a while. So really, we're putting our focus and our energy into Twitch. We're putting our energy into Twitch. Go to Twitch, hit the like button. You don't have to watch these things live. You don't have to be notified. I don't want to bother you guys. Just, it would help me out quite a lot. And if you want to give me money, patreon.com/HotDadReads. These are my cats. I'm going to go and, well, hopefully beat The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. That's my goal for tonight. I'll let you know if I make it. Have yourselves an agreeable evening.